So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand.
Atheist and agnostic as well.
Potatoes! I'm not exposing myself to. I'm so sorry. I'm pulling a St. Bernard here
Because 'tis the season.
it's not even a little bit the season. But, well, I guess the nativity
Right?
we're getting into. Last episode was great. But St. Bernard Saint Day is August.
Yeah.
So we get to enjoy his boob loving all year long.
It's true.
That's not what we're talking about today. Well, milk is
Food.
Milk is food.
Yeah.
When you're feeding a baby, it's food.
Sure. And food makes everything better unless you can't eat what's being served.
Yeah.
Which is a thing I have to live with pretty regularly.
As do Jews and Muslims.
For sure.
And
Lots of
Hindus
people around the world.
and Buddhists. And
It's a thing.
celiacs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Touch wood, do not have any of those issues.
Right? That's
Between
nice.
atheism and no dietary restrictions, it is very nice.
Yeah, I'm glad that when people ask me what I can't eat, I usually just say lead and arsenic.
Yeah. I mean, one of my philosophies is you can eat anything
Once.
So,
Like, anything's a dildo if you're brave enough.
once. Some things can be dildos more than once, but
Some things.
everything can be a dildo at least once if you're brave.
Yeah.
Anyway. So yeah, today we're going to talk about food and eating in different religions. We're going to talk about dietary restrictions, and we're going to talk about
Feasts.
cultural foods is the wrong word, religious foods. Things that,
The religious habit of eating.
yeah.
Yeah.
And some foods, I'm thinking of like challah bread,
Sure.
kind of falls under a religious food.
Sure.
Anyway, we're going to get into all of it.
All of this on the Holy Watermelon Podcast.
Forgot that was the thing we did. We recorded 2 weeks ago, and I forgot did that. All right. So, speaking of challah bread, let's talk about the Jews.
All right. There's a lot of rules.
Oh, they have the most rules of anyone. That was of the big ones.
Yeah.
There's probably some small ones out there that are borderline cults. If you can't eat that much.
Maybe. So, the law about what you can eat in Judaism is called Kashrut. So, you'll often hear things being described as kosher or non-kosher. That's part of the Kashrut law. Jews only eat kosher food. Basically, the word just means fit for consumption. And things that are not called kosher, you won't hear this word nearly as often, is treif.
Treif. I was wondering how you said it.
Yeah, usually we'll just say not kosher. At least if you hang out near me anyway.
But there is that sort of category of neither kosher nor forbidden.
Sure.
So non-kosher encompasses a little more than treif,
That's fair.
I would say.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and while kashrut laws are kind of complex, and so we'll get into some of these things that will live in that gray zone.
okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start with the basics. If it lives in the water, it must have scales.
Fish.
Right. But not all fish.
Right.
Not all fish have scales.
Right.
Sharks are kind of in this weird gray zone. They do have scales, but the way that their scales are built, some rabbi whose name is just gone from my mind right now, decided centuries ago that because when peeling the scales off you damage the skin, it's not kosher.
Okay.
Yeah.
That probably falls under the blood law, which we'll get to.
Well, I mean, if you drain it, then theoretically that's...
I don't know.
I don't know that it's not connected, but it doesn't feel to me like it should be connected.
Right.
How about that?
Okay. Reptiles are bad, so no frogs, or well, I guess frogs are amphibians. Amphibians are also bad.
Right.
No lizards. You can't eat a gecko.
Yeah, if it drags its belly when it walks across the ground, it's bad.
I guess alligator would sort of be the one reptile that people like to eat. Snake. Some people eat snake.
Yeah, it happens. Not in the Middle East as much as,
No,
say,
I was
Louisiana,
gonna say
Georgia.
Southern United States. And shellfish is bad.
Yeah, for sure.
Too bad.
Yeah. Then if it eats grass, it must have a cloven hoof. So camels are no good because even though they eat grass, they got weird toes that
Oh yeah, they do
their
have weird
toenails
toes.
kind of look like hooves
But they got
sometimes.
multiple
They full on have their
toes.
toes for
Yeah.
sure. But buffalo is good, sheep is good, your regular cow is good.
Horses
But
though,
horses bad.
because it's a solid nail.
Exactly, one solid nail hoof thing. And if it has wings, it must not be a predator or a scavenger.
So no vultures.
Right. No eagles, no owls, no bats. So the weird thing, in the previous ones, we're given a specific category, like how do you define these animals, and then here are a couple examples. For this one that I have just simplified, that's not actually written into the Torah. Instead, the Torah gives us a specific list of animals that you cannot eat. And then somewhere else these are approved offerings at the tabernacle or the temple of these birds are fine. The problem is we're relying entirely on tradition about these things because the words that we have in the Torah don't have a reliable translation anymore.
That's fair.
So
Well, I mean, think of how much we've learned about fauna in the last 2,000 years.
Sure.
More than 2,000 years for the Torah.
yeah,
Yeah. And then just the world got bigger, right? What we
Yeah.
have over in North America was not hanging out in the Middle East.
exactly.
So yeah.
So part of what informs this is just generation to generation tradition of we've been eating pigeons and doves. We're not eating falcons and whatnot. Yeah,
Do you think some of this influences what we eat secularly as well?
absolutely.
Because like horses always been kind of taboo to eat.
In a predominantly English Christian tradition, sure. If you're Scandinavian, horse is much less of a big deal.
Yeah, so this must influence some of that, even if people don't
Oh, definitely.
realize it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, where we draw that line between pet and food, it's just a cultural tradition thing that often comes back to what we see here in the Torah.
Old religions, and
Yeah.
when we get into Islam too, probably some of that as well.
Pretty much.
Cats and dogs. Cats are halal, but they like them, and dogs are haram, so they would never.
Right.
You don't eat your pet. We're not gonna eat you, sweet baby.
Yeah. So we know for sure chicken and partridge are good birds for eating. Owl and vulture are specifically on the list of do not eat. Domesticated pigeons are good. Those are the ones that you would even take to the temple to sacrifice. Feral pigeons, as we know them today, I mean, feral pigeons hasn't been a long-standing part of our troubles. We gave up on the pigeons when we had reliable mail service and the phone. So, because they're scavengers, you wouldn't eat them. And bats are forbidden birds too. Just look at them. They're obviously wrong.
They're not even birds, Preston,
I
but I
know.
understand the Torah thinks they are.
They fly and they eat meat or bugs. So,
All right. You have a
eat
note
them.
about turkey, and it's turkey season, so you better tell us.
Yeah, turkey, interestingly enough, does not have a strong rabbinical tradition. Why? Because we've only been eating turkey. White folk have only been eating turkeys for about 400 years. Turkeys are native to North America, and so rabbinical Judaism, way back in the good old days, didn't have the exposure. Because they're similar enough to chickens, the general and fairly new tradition is, yeah, they must be fine. They fit the rules based on how I've summarized them so far.
They're delicious.
Yeah. But they're really the only bird that lives in that gray zone. There are a few others because there's some dispute, I guess, about translation. But this is the one that lives firmly in the positive end of the gray zone.
All right. Good for
Yeah.
it. Good for us.
Right? If you're kosher, anyway. And also, insects and crustaceans are bad. Just broad category, they're bad. Probably because a whole bunch of them are venomous and it can be tricky to know which ones sometimes. And a lot of them are just gross unless you're farming them very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
But there are 4 exceptions in the Torah. Again, tricky business because of translation process and all of the time that's between the present and when this was written. Generally, it's for sure that these 4 species are some sort of grasshopper, locust, or cricket. There are specific traditions of modern identifications, but I don't think any of them are uncontested.
Okay. Another thing you can't eat, I mentioned it briefly, is you cannot consume blood. So there's a specific way to slaughter an animal to drain it of its blood. So that is how kosher, why they get the kosher label in the grocery store.
Yeah, very important detail.
One thing I learned is that sometimes we talk about, oh, it's kosher because a rabbi blessed it. No,
that's a Muslim thing.
Yeah.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, but I think that's I thought I had it in my brain that that's what it was. So that's a common misconception I'd like to clear. So if it follows the rules Preston mentioned, it is inherently kosher. Plus, meat, in addition to being slaughtered a certain way, must be processed in a certain way for it to be kosher. You can't just eat raw meat.
Right.
So meat must be broiled, roasted, or soaked and salted for it to be kosher. That must be why they're so good at. That must be why they're so good at brisket.
Yeah, there's special ways you got to cook there, and there's only for beef in particular. There's parts of the animal that are meant to be eaten, and parts that are meant to be offered up and just destroyed in fire. And so, when you're left with less than the whole animal, you get good at cooking what you've got left.
But I feel like broiling and roasting, and we could probably go further into those definitions. That feels restrictive because that's not just throwing a chicken breast on a frying pan. I wouldn't call that broiling or roasting. Roasted, right. That happens in an oven, in my opinion.
Yep.
So, I mean, I was going to say they can't eat a hamburger, but they also can't eat, they can't eat a cheeseburger.
Right. No cheeseburgers.
Let's talk about that, actually. That's our next thing.
Yeah, so meat cannot mix with dairy products, ever. It's a really good way to hedge up the rule to make sure you don't break the original rule. Comes from Deuteronomy 14:21. It says, "Do not boil a kid, a young goat, in its mother's milk." And so that feels like a bit of a stretch to apply this to how you eat. For sure, this was a ritual act of actually boiling a kid in its mother's milk and an act of worship for foreign gods. And so you don't do that. Don't do these weird things that your neighbors are doing for their weird gods. And to make sure that you don't do anything like it, don't eat cheese with your meat.
And I even read you must wait 3 to 6 hours before consuming the others. So if you have a milkshake, you can't have a burger for another 3 to 6 hours.
You got to make sure your stomach empties out.
Out of your stomach.
Yeah.
No, it's kind of wild.
A little bit.
I'm going to interject as a loser. Have you heard of the show Nobody Wants This?
I've heard of the show.
So our Netflix algorithms are very different. So
Sure.
It's a romance series
with
Kristen Bell and Adam Brody.
Mm-hmm.
And Kristen's just like a secular woman, and Adam Brody's a rabbi, and they fall in love. And when she meets his parents, she brings a charcuterie board
with cheese and meat.
Cheese and meat and pork.
Of course.
It's very cute if you like romance. I highly recommend. I'm desperate for season 2.
Okay.
But yes, that is a faux pas. And this show will help prevent that when you meet a hot rabbi. You're welcome from Katie.
Yeah. Your traditional charcuterie board, as has been popular for the last few years, wildly inappropriate gift.
for the Jews, yeah. All produce is kosher. You don't need to worry about fruits and veg.
Yeah, nobody ever worries about rules about vegetables. If you grow it yourself and you know it's not poisonous, you're good to go.
Sweet. There's more rules for kosher, though.
Yes. Yes, there are. You need to make sure that you prevent cross-contamination. If you've got dairy in your kitchen, you probably do. Be careful that you don't cross-contaminate anything that would get into contact with your meat. Very, very careful not to break that rule.
So I wrote this note that Jewish people will even wash utensils in separate wash basins so that they never share the same sink. But I didn't make the point that I think is important to make, is that they will often have 2 of everything. Some will even have 2 refrigerators.
Sure.
So
It feels unnecessary to me,
if
but
you're an Orthodox,
that's the tradition.
Hasidic Jew, you probably do. But so, right, 2 frying pans and 2 bowl. I mean, a lot of us have multiples of things, but they will have, you know, I mean, I got 4 cutting boards, but I use them all for everything. They'll
Right.
have their meat cutting board and their cheese cutting board, and the 2 shall never.
Did you know there's a reason that your set of cutting boards you buy at IKEA come in 3 different colors?
I do, but I don't follow those rules.
That's fair.
For our listeners, it's because they're color coded, so you can use them for different things.
Yeah.
The green one's for veggies, the red one's for meat.
The white one's for whatever you need.
Oh.
Or grayish, I guess.
Yeah. I saw a video on Instagram this week, and I didn't put any notes on it. And I saw it, and it was, you know, a Orthodox or conservative Jewish couple, and they were moving into a new apartment, and they were making their kitchen kosher. And I mean, I feel a little bit bad for them because the comments were quite vitriolic, but it is a strange thing to witness. And so the husband was taking a blowtorch to the oven. And I actually found a website that did confirm all of this, because I was like, are they doing this for the views or because it's real?
Often enough people will do it just
And
for
so
the
yeah,
gram.
he took a blowtorch to the oven, and you have to get your oven inside red hot. And then he poured boiling water on the countertop, and then took an iron, like a clothing iron, to it with the boiling water. I know it doesn't sound very safe, but I found a website that confirmed this is how you kosher your home. Microwaves are really easy. You just microwave boiling water for 10 minutes. Or microwave water till boiling for 10 minutes. And then sinks, same thing, like scalding hot water. Lots of fire and heat to kosher your space. And then even then they will say 1/2 of your counter should be for meat, the other half should be for dairy.
I want to say that you don't need to have one whole side of your counter for dairy, because I'm thinking of what dairy I deal with in the kitchen. And then I remember I usually don't lay out a board or anything to cut a block of cheese. I just do it on the countertop. And that's why you need a separate half.
My former cook husband is dying thinking about your knife care cutting cheese just on a hard countertop.
Oh, it's not that hard. You've seen my counters. It's that wood veneer nonsense.
I know, but how?
Now, if it was a stone countertop, absolutely do not do that. Bad for your knives. If for no other concerns.
Oh boy. I also found this really interesting. You can buy kosher cannabis edibles.
Sure.
And that was just interesting to me that like you gotta iron your countertop, but sure, do a bunch of THC.
Yeah. No, cannabis is for sure a part of ancient Israelite tradition. And maybe not to the same level the Rastafarians use it, but who's to say? A lot of that ritual is lost and forgotten. But part of what would have been a complication is that for so long, all of our gelatin was always pork.
Oh, yeah.
But now, it's a lot more common to see people use beef gelatin and other options.
Nice.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, gummies and whatnot are now totally back on the table for people who can't eat pork.
Unless you're Muslim. Because drugs are haram.
Generally, mostly, yes.
I mean, it's not monolithic. Someone's breaking these rules.
Well, and the most concrete rule, we'll get to this later on, is just against alcohol.
Right.
And everything else is up to the interpretation of imams and whatnot more modernly.
Right. I also briefly mentioned there's this like third category called parv.
Yeah.
Parve?
Parv. Or sometimes you'll see it written as parev.
Right, I did see that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it means neutral.
Yeah. So this is, but not like that happy middle ground between kosher and non-kosher. This is a neutral thing that can go with meat or dairy because it will contain neither. Except it can contain fish and still be parv.
Huh.
Because fish doesn't count as meat, and the Catholics agree. So obviously that's how that works. But yeah, and it can, as long as it's kosher and doesn't have dairy or meat, then it's parv.
All right.
Because then it can go with either.
So we're going to jump to Islam.
Yeah, we've been hinting and poking at it.
Yeah,
long
because
enough.
they've been hinting about it. And I mean, Christians are not very exciting on their dietary restrictions.
Right.
Because on the outside, it can look like that Judaism and Islam have similar dietary restrictions. The big one, of course, being no pork. And they also do have this slaughter piece as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll often see Muslims take the kosher dinner option in a space where that's the way it's labeled. But yeah, really, pork is strictly prohibited, and there's not a whole lot of other food things that are haram. Haram being the opposite of halal. Haram bad, halal good. Other things may or may not be contested.
And then, again, both Jews and Muslims require the blood to be drained from the animal completely. So when you see halal meat, it means that it is both not pork and drained properly. So you can't just buy any beef.
Right.
You can eat it, but it can't be just any beef.
If you want to make sure that it's got no blood, the labels of halal and kosher will be reliable. But yeah, I don't know.
Maybe I'll try it just to see if there are any like cleaner, like, you know, you get all like the fat and gross bits on chicken.
Sure.
Yeah, all right.
It's worth a look.
But there are differences between
Yes.
their dietary laws, and actually quite a few. Again, on the outside it looks similar, but it's not.
Most of the things that are not kosher are still fine for Muslims to eat. But there's some important things that Muslims can't have that Jews can. Like
Alcohol.
Yes. That's the number one big one.
Number one. Jewish people love wine. That's a big, broad stroke,
But historically, that's been a big part of their culture.
yeah, and Muslims will not consume it.
Yeah.
They can eat way more meat.
Yeah, they can eat way more meat, and they don't need to be so rigorous about their kitchen. It needs to be clean, and how you handle food has some rules to it. But like, food to food cross-contamination isn't such a problem, but food to uncleanliness is a big problem.
Yeah, so like as an example, I have a Muslim friend and she won't eat at my house because none of my stuff is halal. All my utensils have touched non-halal meat.
Right.
And so that's like the cross contamination, whereas
Yeah.
everything at her house has only touched halal things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not as rigorous, but yeah, you would keep your, and again, restaurants that offer halal options would, you know,
Basically have to have a halal
whole
kitchen.
Yeah. So, and there's a Boston Pizza near us that says they have halal. So that means they're in everything you eat. If not, even if you're not Muslim, your chicken parmesan is halal.
Yeah, I've heard of people getting offended at the idea that that they could be asked to eat a halal diet or a kosher diet. And apart from missing out on a few things that you might like, the diet still includes a lot of great things.
I was like, has no one eaten food from India or Pakistan? Like, yummo.
Right?
All I've ever wanted, and we'll get to this, is to be invited to iftar.
That would be nice.
That's all I've ever wanted. So
One day.
I should just call one of my girlfriends. They totally would. They probably just think I'm not interested, but I am.
Sure. Yeah. So there are some really important rules about how the animals die. This is really important for Muslims. Islam is concerned with the ethical treatment of animals before their painless slaughter, preferably at the hand of a Muslim, with the animal facing Mecca. It's those last two details aren't super strict rules in all groups of Muslims, but some of them very strongly prefer it.
Mm-hmm.
But the ethical treatment of animals, extremely important. Stunning an animal is, according to Muslim law, not supposed to be a thing you do all the time, like we do. We stun all of our animals before we slaughter them. But their official stance is only do that when necessary, like if they're really putting up a fight.
Yeah.
But I would say for the most part, they don't get a whole lot of complaints on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
If an animal has been killed brutally by force or by stabbing, any way other than the preferred method of killing an animal, it is haram. It must not be eaten. If it is found dead, it must not be eaten.
So no roadkill and snacks.
Right. Yeah, if it's killed by brute force, bad time.
All right.
Even though sometimes that's maybe the most convenient way to kill something, to just chase it down with your Jeep. There's not a whole lot of people who think that's cool.
I mean, I can't even remember where I heard this, but it was like a friend of a friend. If they found like a roadkill deer and it was like in decent condition, they would call whoever you call animal, and be like, "Can I take it for food?" And often they'd be like, "Yeah, sure. Why waste a good deer?"
Sure.
Not halal. That's haram.
If you are confident in what caused it to die, then from a secular perspective, there's no reason
Right.
not to. If you're confident that it wasn't dead because of sickness, then you're fine.
Yeah.
I think. But
That would be haram.
Historically, religions have had
Frowned upon.
a little stricter rules on that. Mostly for safety, I must assume.
That makes sense.
A lot of these decisions seem arbitrary and like it's just a control thing, but a lot of these decisions were made to keep people safe.
I think so.
I mean, the cheese and meat thing, we talked about that. I think it's silly. But
Because cheeseburgers.
Shellfish? Loads of people with shellfish allergies, enough that you see a few people die and go, let's not eat those. Let's not serve those at our great big barbecues. That sort of thing.
That's fair.
Pigs, though, I did some reading into it. They were like the special meal of Egyptian priests. And Israel, as they left Egypt and separated themselves from that culture, did a really serious job of separating themselves in every way that they can think of. And that may actually be a bigger part of the decision to not eat pork than just what's that parasite that's commonly found in pork?
Oh, is it listeria? Pork listeria?
I don't remember.
I think you can get worms.
Yeah.
Our friend had it.
That sounds awful.
Ross,
Oh yeah.
when he was on his mission, he almost died.
That sucks.
Yeah. But fun fact: Canadian pork is
Completely
completely
free
fine.
of those
You can
parasites.
actually eat, not rare, but it doesn't have to be well done pork in Canada. I still do, but you can apparently.
Yeah, I don't feel the need to eat my pork chops rare.
Yeah, no, me neither. I don't worry if there are,
Right.
but I'm happy for well done pork.
Yeah.
Look at us just chatting about food. We should start a food show. Muslims and Jews agree that an animal slain on an altar to another god is inedible.
Yeah.
Fair.
Big bad times. Because the sacrifice is always like you're eating it as a community, and so if you eat a sacrifice given to an other god, then you are claiming that you're part of this other faith community. Jews don't like it. Muslims don't like it. That's just the way it goes.
Fair.
And yeah, in a strict monotheistic tradition, that it makes some sense. Though the specific deal with the Jewish law is that they don't have to worry about the stone altar. Muslims have a law against anything sacrificed on a stone altar.
Oh, okay.
But Jewish sacrifices would be done on an altar, but not usually a stone one, but occasionally a stone one. So they don't have that rule.
Okay.
Just not anything sacrificed to other gods.
I thought this was interesting. Food wastage is considered haram, and Muslims are also encouraged not to overeat. So gluttony.
Don't waste your food. Don't eat way more than you need to eat. Share it with people who need it is, in fact, the guidance.
So the not overeating part makes me feel a little bit bad because my Muslim friends, sometimes she'll invite me over for paratha, and I definitely overeat because it's so good. So they're probably like,
are you eating so much that you're taking food away from other people?
not at the immediate table. But they're probably like making all these paratha going, we could be giving these to the poor, Katie.
Maybe.
You're probably just thinking about haram white girl, which they're not wrong. Christians.
We've talked about this before and gotten into it a little bit with Muslims and Jewish people that no group is monolithic. Christianity, much less so.
Yeah, food restrictions vary from denomination to denomination.
In early Christian history, this is recorded in the book of the Acts of the Apostles in the Christian Bible. Simon Peter, the chief apostle of Christ, recorded a revelation that after Jesus' final cleansing sacrifice, no animal was unclean. So in this revelation, Jesus commanded Peter to eat various meats that had been forbidden under the law of Moses.
This feels ridiculous.
Well, so the way that he received this revelation in a dream.
Like, he was just hungry. Or, like, he saw something and he couldn't stop thinking about eating it.
He was a grown-ass man, well ingrained into the Jewish tradition.
Yeah, and he probably had a dream about, like, a pork chop sandwich and was like, damn, girl, that would be really good.
It's a good image. So in this dream, there's giant sheet, like a bed sheet sort of thing, is lowered down in front of him, and it's got a whole bunch of animals, all of them non-kosher animals. And he hears the voice of God saying, eat. And he's like, God, look what you got there. No, that's dirty. And the voice of God comes to him again and says, eat. He says, no, that's bad food. That's not food. And here's one more time, eat. And do not call what I have cleaned unclean.
This sounds like an episode of The Simpsons and Homer.
A little bit, yeah.
I love it. I'm for it.
And so since then, Christians have worried a lot less about kosher and non-kosher food, to the point that it's not something that we worry about generally. Though many Christians do prefer to ignore this revelation, it's a little bit weird. And claim the Bible is flawless, but let's ignore this little section in the New Testament. That's, if you read the New Testament, you generally consider it to be more important and authoritative than the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. So it's weird that this choice is made, that some people prefer the Torah over the freedom that comes with the New Testament.
Christians don't have strict dietary laws, but there are some periods of fasting. Most popular, I would say, is during the season of Lent. Many Christians will give up specific food or other indulgences. Imperial tradition Christians, so these are Catholics, Anglicans, Lutherans, and Orthodox, avoid meat on Fridays.
Yeah, except fish. Remember we talked about this, how fish doesn't count as meat. I don't understand how that decision was made, but it's the muscles of an animal. It's meat. That's how that works.
Yeah, I mean, you got like animal, mineral,
plant.
Plant.
Yeah.
That's basically the entire world. Not
Pretty much. I mean, fungus is a different
Yeah,
thing.
okay, well, that's
Bacteria are a
probably-
different thing,
right,
but
right.
still, yeah. It's
80% of the entire world.
it's weird to have this distinction.
Can you imagine back then, like, what they thought a fish was? You know what I mean? Like, what kind of brain gymnastics you had to, like, look at this thing and be like, that's not an animal.
It's a fish.
All right.
You got birds and beasts and fish.
I get it.
And don't even worry about the category that they can all fit in together. That's what you got. Birds, beasts, fish.
Perfect.
So because fish don't count as meat, you get to have this fish on Fridays. And that's why the filet of fish exists at McDonald's.
That's amazing.
Right?
I haven't had a fillet of fish in years. Now I kind of want one. No.
I don't know if I've ever had a filet of fish at McDonald's.
My brother used to get fillet of fish a lot when we were
Yeah.
kids.
It's when given the options of the whole McDonald's menu,
Right.
filet of fish is not the thing that's going to jump out at me.
You know what? I even feel the same about fish tacos.
Sure.
And it's just like the idea of them doesn't appeal to me. But when someone's like, you want my fish tacos? I'm like, this is delicious. But like,
But there's other things I want more.
yeah, there's no I would don't have much of a desire to order one. But
Right.
I don't know if you know this, Preston, some Christian groups forbid the consumption of alcohol.
Oh. I do happen to know of a few.
Name 2.
You got the Mormons.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot of Pentecostal groups that'll ban alcohol.
Frown upon it.
Well, and I mean, there's a lot of variety in there too, right? Some say it's okay to drink, just don't get drunk. Others will say absolutely no alcohol. That's our monotheists, and a wide variety of rules on what you can eat and what you cannot.
Right. We're just going to touch really on one dharmic religion today, the Hindus. Hinduism encourages a vegetarian diet because of their belief in non-violence and compassion for all living things.
That's a pretty good rule. I like meat, but killing is violence in some way. And so if you want to avoid violence, you're going to have to go without meat.
Yeah.
Bugs.
Because you can just eat them.
Yeah.
But you kill them when you eat them.
Yeah. It's still violent.
Yeah.
There's no unviolent death. So one of the things that's tickled me a little bit lately is these stories that keep popping up that people are claiming to prove that plants feel pain when you harvest or eat them. And so there's just no winning.
And you know what? I don't even disbelieve that.
Right.
But what are we supposed to do?
Right? You're supposed to hurt things to survive,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Now, that's not a really good philosophy to run with in life, to hurt things to survive. Some people do take too much pleasure in that.
No,
So
I think there's like
don't lean that direction.
there's a compassionate management to our food
Absolutely.
resources.
Absolutely.
And I've, funnily enough, been thinking about this. As some of you know, we got a dog.
She's so sweet.
So sweet. And one of her favorite things is beef lung.
Sure.
That's what her treats are. That's so I know things like feedlots,
Mhm.
these massive industrial cattle things are less ethical, but you can't deny that they don't use every piece of the animal.
Right.
And even if it's purely selfish on the people who run the thing, because they'll make money selling the lungs to a dog food company and they'll make money selling the beef to a meat producer or meat processor, and they'll make money selling the skin to a shoe company. And so even from a purely selfish capitalistic perspective,
Yep.
every part of the animal's being used. They'll sell the skulls to some hippie lady in rural Alberta to make art with it. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's not quite the same as the older traditions of use all the parts to honor the animal. It's definitely more selfish, but it's still reasonably good.
Yeah, and I think there's some more ethical practices I'm actually quite intrigued by. The halal and kosher, right? Free range chicken, right, is more ethical than caged chicken. So is halal beef, and I mean, they would say yes. Muslims and Jews would say halal and kosher beef is more ethical than what we eat.
Sure.
I'd have to do some research to confirm that, but if it's cost the same at Costco,
Right.
and they didn't suffer,
yeah, it's kind of nice.
yeah.
Most other religions will encourage vegetarian diets.
Yeah, we see it in Buddhism as well, but for the same reason that we see it in Hinduism.
Yeah.
They're father and son, those religions.
Yeah. This reminds me of one of my pet peeves with the Noah movie with Russell Crowe. That the movie really pushes vegetarianism. And in a weird sort of way.
He becomes friends with all the animals on the boat.
That's not even part of it.
I haven't seen it, but
it's really weird to me because it clearly doesn't understand the Hebrew context of the story, that they were offering sacrifices on a regular basis and eating meat as a sacrament, part of their worship. So to say that that same God doesn't want you to eat meat is ridiculous.
Fair.
And there's a passage in the New Testament that I want to say it's Paul, but right now I'm second guessing myself. He says to his audience that if you are forbidding people to eat meat, you're on the wrong side of this argument.
Okay.
But Christians pick and choose very often the parts they like and the parts they don't.
You know what my favorite thing is about eating, Preston?
What's your favorite thing about eating, Preston?
Eating with friends.
Yes, eating with friends is great.
And having an excuse to eat a big meal.
Sure.
So you know what we're going to do now?
We're going to have a feast.
We actually will. It's going to be good. But we're going to review all those 4 religions again and talk about how fun it is to eat instead of how fun it is to not eat.
I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about not eating too.
But the actual religious practice of consuming things instead of just the rules.
Yeah. It'll be great.
Right. So, you know who does it really well? The Jews.
Right?
They're good at both of these things.
Judaism is all about eating together.
You know what? Watched this show, Nobody Wants This, and I was reading about Shabbat, and I was like, and we've talked about Shabbat in the past, I was like, I could get behind this. It's literally a religious holiday every week. It's like having Christmas every week.
Yeah.
That is how important Shabbat is. And we'll get into it. I just love it. I could do Shabbat. Maybe I should do Shabbat.
Sure.
All right.
So sacrificial meals are prescribed in great detail in the Torah. All kinds of how you deal with the ox or the cow, how you deal with the goats, how you deal with the doves. And all of these are offered in what have essentially become a holy barbecue. Sacrifice literally means make holy. It doesn't mean to give away and destroy or give up. It just means to make it holy. So you'll see often enough people will pray over their meals. It's not that different. You're praying, you're sharing food. That's the deal. You have sacrificed that, whatever the animal is, and all of its fixins.
Love it.
Yeah. And nothing serves God if it fails to serve people.
I like that.
Yeah. So we share it with the community. And frequent community barbecues, obviously, are going to bring people together. Not just physically together, but you get a chance to chat and build fraternity and community. And we've mentioned this before. Judaism was fundamentally changed when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, putting an end to that regular holy barbecue.
Yeah. Shabbat. My brain's going. I'm thinking maybe I'll do a monthly Shabbat.
Sure.
Next year.
Okay.
2025. It's the Jewish day of rest on Saturdays. So this is because on the seventh day, God took a break. And it begins at sunset on what we call Friday, because the Jewish calendar is sunrise to sunset.
Sunset to sunset.
Sunset to sunset.
Yeah.
That's a day.
Instead of midnight to midnight.
Right. So it begins at sunset on Friday, and there are 3 meals used to celebrate Shabbat. The one I'm thinking of doing is the evening supper on Friday,
Mhm.
then a Saturday lunch, and then a late Saturday afternoon dinner. Challah bread is served to start the meals, and meat or fish is served, and wine is poured. And because it's the day of rest, there's no cell phones, which I kind
a
of
good rule.
love. You can't work.
Right?
I think some people take that to the extreme.
Sure.
Like you can't even press a button, so they have all these things. Have you seen some of those?
Yeah.
Religulous covers it, where this guy, like Orthodox Jew, can't press a button, so he's like done this whole like Rube Goldberg machine to get stuff done. And he's like, isn't that more work than just pressing the button?
Right.
But yeah,
I do like the continuous elevators that a lot of places have because of these rules.
Right.
That's kind of cool.
That, I mean, yeah, there's probably some fun innovations, but also some over the top solutions.
There are some over the top solutions for sure.
You should talk about this because you've hosted both of these.
Yeah. So it's been a while since we've hosted either of these actually.
Can you do
at our
Hanukkah
home.
this year?
Maybe.
Okay,
We'll take a look.
we'll help.
Thanks. So there are special feasts in Judaism. The 2 that I want to talk about, because there's something special about them food-wise that separates them from the others, are Hanukkah and Passover. So Hanukkah, I think we've talked about before what it celebrates. That's not what we're talking about today. Food.
Yum.
So because of the miracle of the oil, that is a good old rabbinical tale that's built around this tradition of the rededication of the temple, deep fried foods are hugely important.
Donuts.
So many donuts. We got latkes in the
Deep fried potatoes.
Yeah, I don't know why my brain just stopped.
I know. That's why I'm trying to help.
Donuts and latkes are like the 2 big main things, but anything deep fried is great.
So good.
And then for Passover, there's actually a couple of rules about things that you shouldn't be eaten. Leavened bread is a big no-no. Leading into the Passover season, you got to get rid of all of the yeast in your house. Give it to a neighbor. Sometimes it's
Jewish.
just like a non-Jewish neighbor. Just hold on to this for me. I don't pick it up after Passover is sometimes the deal. I don't think that really follows the spirit of it, but it's fine enough, I guess. I can't complain about it. So we get matzah bread, which is basically your saltine crackers.
I was going to say, it's basically a cracker.
Yeah. Flour and water. Keep it real simple, because they had to run away from Egypt without enough time to let the bread rise, is the story behind it. And so there's also a handful of things that they eat special with this occasion to remember the bitterness of the travel and leaving their homes and the hope that comes with entering the Holy Land, things like that.
Adam Brody's basketball team, and nobody wants this, is called the Matzah Ballers.
Very nice.
I like it. So the Islamic tradition around food is actually a tradition around not food. But there is food.
Of course.
I think most people are aware of Ramadan and how Muslims fast during this month, and they don't consume food from sunrise to sunset. So anytime the sun's up, they don't get to eat. If you're here in Canada and Ramadan falls in the summer, that fucking sucks.
Yeah.
If it falls in the winter,
It's a good time.
it's like, well, it's 6 o'clock right now, but it's been dark since 4, so that's nicer.
Yeah, Ramadan in the winter is nice. It's a little annoying to me that the calendar doesn't deal with any sort of adjustment for the seasons, but
In the Middle East, it wouldn't have mattered. Where
yeah,
it's developed, you're too close to the equator for there to be a huge, like where we are, huge fluctuation in night
Yes.
and day. I hope you're not a Muslim up in like the Yukon or Alaska where you get 6 months of sun.
Right. Oh,
They must have.
if Ramadan is during that sweet spot in the beginning of summer where the sun does not set,
I was gonna say they must have some.
I feel like
Actually,
if
they
you're a
do.
Muslim, you just don't go that far north.
Fair. And they actually do. You can always pay a donation if you can't fast and then fast at a different time of the year.
Sure.
And you can do that by day. So if there's 2 days you can't fast, then you can either make up the fast later in the year or pay a donation to make up for your 2 days of fasting.
Or just don't move that far north.
Or don't move that far north.
Or south. You can't forget that there are, in fact, people living on the South Pole.
Right. There are 2 meals. There's suhoor and iftar. Suhoor is before sunrise and iftar is after sunset. Again, if this is a time where you get sundown from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., those probably all blend together.
Yeah. Well, you got to have a nap in between.
You'd have to. These meals are typically enjoyed with family, friends, and the wider community. So people host these meals in their homes or they'll go to a mosque and have a big community meal.
Yeah. I don't know if we do it every year, but I know for a while that my church has actually hosted iftar.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's kind of a cool setup. Dates are a popular thing to eat.
Dates are very popular. You will see them a lot during Ramadan in your grocery stores.
Yeah, and this is the first thing that you eat for iftar.
To break your fast, yeah. And when the sun's down, Muslims can eat and drink as much as they like.
Yeah, you will find people who will overdo it because they're so hungry from the fast.
And they do recommend not doing that because it makes it harder to get through your day.
Yeah, it's not a best practice for sure. So there are, in addition to this period of fasting where we do the opposite of what we've been talking about, there are 2 great feasts of Islam. There are more depending on your subset of Islam. These are the 2 that are universally celebrated by Muslims. And so the biggest one is Eid al-Fitr, which is the breakfast feast.
Oh, I love a good breakfast.
Which doesn't mean morning, but it celebrates the end of the month-long fast of Ramadan. So it's popularly called the sugar feast because it's so sweet to have such a great meal after all of this fiery month of Ramadan. So this big thing brings people together, and now the sun can't see you eat. It's a great time. Fasting during this time is forbidden. The other Eid al-Adha, is literally the feast of the sacrifice, celebrates the occasion that Abraham was going to kill his firstborn for God, but an angel stopped him. And so Abraham then received a promise that his posterity would be blessed forever, helped by the fact that he didn't kill his own son.
There we go.
And so get people together, celebrate something, and have a big meal is really what's at the heart of all of this funny business.
Christians.
Every day on the calendar is a feast day for Christians.
I know. And I mean, it's interesting because they don't really have dietary restrictions. There isn't like a holiday. I mean, we have Christmas and Easter where we gather to eat, but nothing ritualistic. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, what might be a turkey day for some people is a ham day for others.
Lobster day for some. I had some friends who
Sure.
do lobster for Christmas.
Yeah. Chinese food sells really well on Christmas Eve.
Mm-hmm.
For a Christian somewhere is celebrating a feast day on every day of the calendar. Some are more widely celebrated than others, naturally. For example, St. Peter's feast day celebrated a lot more than St. Bernard of Clairvaux.
Do you know what today's feast day is? We're not going to tell people what day we record. We'll see if anyone wants to figure out.
Sure.
Today is St. Elizabeth of Hungary. She was one of the good saints.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. We did an episode on her. Yeah.
Cool.
So you can figure out what day we recorded this versus when we released it.
Right. So Easter is the biggest feast day. all of the Christians everywhere celebrate Easter or Passover. They're not exactly the same, but they're pretty much the same for Christians. It's not the same thing as Passover for Jewish people, and sometimes it's not even the same time.
Right.
But usually, Passover helps determine Easter. Usually. Sometimes Easter is a month before Passover, and that's a little weird. But that's just the way the calendars work.
Easter is it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. That's wild.
Yeah.
Thanks, Council of Nicaea.
We had to map it out somehow that made
Right.
sense, that we didn't
doesn't-
just say it's the Sunday after
Why we said
Passover.
Christmas is December 25th.
Right. But
So,
we had to tie it to Passover without saying
all
Passover.
right, fine, perfect.
And by we, I mean old fuddy-duddies.
You know what some Christians do like to eat?
What?
Jesus.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who think that that's what they're doing.
And some people know it's just a metaphor, but some people think they're literally eating Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus has been eaten for over 2,000 years
Isn't that wild?
by millions
Yeah.
of people. There can't be anything left.
Turns out you can just make more bread and
Oh.
more wine. It's real easy.
But then it can't literally be Jesus.
Some people will argue
I
with
know
you
that.
on that.
I know that. It's called transubstantiation.
Right. So, one of the great repeatable sacraments of Christian tradition is the communion of the Lord's Supper, also called the Eucharist. So, a meager share of bread and wine is really all that remains of what was once a regular communal feast. Both of these elements are part of the ancient Jewish holy barbecue. The breaking of the bread would be displayed openly. So we often see that described in the Hebrew Bible as showbread. You show it being broken up.
Okay, yeah.
And you wave it around a little bit, and it's got a whole show. I'm not sure why, but that's the deal. And then some wine would be spilt on the ground before the rest was shared with the people. So Jesus explained to his apostles the night of his Last Supper that such represented his impending death. His body would be broken and his blood spilled publicly. People argue over whether Jesus actually wants people to believe that the blessed bread and wine is literally his body and blood. A good chemist can settle that for you, I think.
Also, I think I've told this story before, but there's you'd know better than I would, but there's a process to consecrate the bread and wine to make it into Jesus. This is the transubstantiation
Sure.
that happens. And my religious studies professor, he did it over chips and Coke. And so if it works, he literally ate sour cream and onion Jesus.
Yeah. There's a variety of opinions on how faithful you need to be to the idea of bread and the idea of wine. We'll throw up a real good spreadsheet on what some funny options for this can be.
I saw a reel that what a great dinner party question is, what would be your bread and wine? To represent you. Go.
Huh. I don't know. What would be my bread and wine? Separating it from the framework that we've already established on why.
Yeah, we're not gonna break your body and
right.
Yeah. Spill your blood. But maybe.
Are we just talking something that would represent Preston?
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. Gummy bears and orange juice would be all right.
Okay.
I don't
The
know.
orange juice surprises me mostly because
I
when we
love
hang
orange
out,
juice.
I see you drink a lot of pop because we're hanging
Sure.
out socially. I would be wine, but
Yeah.
not red wine.
Okay.
I'd be a white wine. I'd be a nice Chardonnay.
Okay.
And what would my food be? I don't know what my food would be. Coffee crisp have been really tickling my fancy recently, but that's recent. So I'm like, what's something? Oh, Cheerios. churros
Yeah?
and white wine.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
So some churches only perform this sacrament of the Lord's Supper at Easter. Some do it weekly, some do it daily. Tradition varies. But unfortunately, it is just a tiny, tiny little morsel and a tiny little sip instead of a great feast like it was anciently.
And lastly, Hinduism, our one dharmic religion that we're touching on today. Else this episode would go on forever.
Right?
Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 of this next year.
Not a bad idea.
Prasada is a vegetarian offering in Hinduism. Of course, it's vegetarian. The food is especially cooked for giving thanks to a specific deity because we know it's a polytheistic.
Depends who you ask.
Pantheistic, polytheistic.
Hinduism lives under a lot of different labels depending on who you ask.
Right. They have a lot of deities, is the point.
Yes.
There's 2 words actually that prasada and naivedya are closely linked, but slightly different. The food offered to the deity is naivedya, and the return food consumed by mere mortals is prasada.
It's a nice deal.
Yeah.
Something to share with the gods, something to share with the people around you. That sounds all right.
Food is not to be tasted before it is offered to the deity.
Ooh, that defies how I cook.
I think that's probably why Indian women are such good cooks.
Because they don't taste it before they serve it?
Because over time, you'd like taste and be like, oh, that was shit. And then you'd
Sure.
go back and you'd be like, well, and you'd have to eat because that's all there is to eat, right? You're not going to make 2 dinners. So then the next time you'd improve on the last time.
Sure.
And so it'd become very intuitive.
See, I really love being able to improve it in the moment.
I agree. But it's probably very intuitive for them after time. And a lot of like passing recipes down and this is how mom did it and grandma did it. Because you don't get to.
Right.
Once the food is prepared, it is placed before an image of the god or an idol or something. So the deity knows that this is for you. And you must wait 5 to 10 minutes for the god to accept the offering.
And then when the food doesn't disappear, you get to discard it. But it has to have been there for time.
Yes. And there's a blessing you say over it. And then you get to, you can't just like cook the food and be like, here you go, Vishnu.
Right.
You have to like make sure he gets it.
Yeah.
Prasada is shared with worshippers to eat at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
So another big communal meal. And in the temples, the naivedya is only prepared by specific people that know how to do it properly. But Hindus will create their own offerings at home shrines.
Yeah. I'm not going to let somebody else tell me what I do at my home shrine. That makes sense.
Yeah. And then you can't go to because of this next point, strict adherents of Hinduism will not eat any food that hasn't gone through this ritual. You can't go to the temple 3 meals a day. Or snacks.
I do like snacks.
I love snacks. So yeah, you would have to do some of this at home. But for the broader community, it's done by very specific people.
Well, depending on where you are, there would be a temple that would be doing this throughout the day. But that's not everywhere.
I was just talking to a lady, and I know we didn't touch on Sikhism today, but she was in India recently.
Mm-hmm.
She went to a gurdwara, and of course, that gurdwaras provide free food to the community.
Mm-hmm.
And she said they serve it was in Delhi, so some crazy number of people every single day.
Sure.
And she said they had like vats of rice that a person could stand in and disappear, like 6 foot, 7 foot vats of rice.
That's not good for the rice if you disappearing people in it, though.
Right. And then she said the wild thing, like culturally, was, of course, this was in a gurdwara. You had to take your shoes off in a gurdwara, and then they were in the kitchen. And she, here in Canada, North America, health and safety dictates that in a commercial kitchen you need to be wearing shoes.
Yeah.
So she's like, it was so weird, but very interesting to watch.
It's not a commercial kitchen; it's a religious kitchen.
Yeah, it gets exempt. So yeah, so we could talk way more about food if you like this episode, and and want us to talk more about food, because we also love food,
Yeah, food is great.
let us know.
Yeah. So I think the big takeaway is that religion, as suggested in the Latin root of the word, is designed to bring people together. I can't think of any better way to do that than with food.
It's one of my favorite ways to gather with friends.
Yeah.
I am seriously considering Shabbat now.
Sure. Before we go, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, Discord, where you can support us financially, and in return we can offer goods and services.
Discord is not where people support us financially.
No,
It's
that's
where
Patreon.
Discord is where you tell us what your Eucharist would be. I'd love to hear
Yes.
more. But if you do want to support us financially, you can check out Patreon, early release. We do. You can become a priest. You can get some extra content, and we also have a spread shop where you can buy our merch.
Thanks for joining us.
Peace be with you.
Spiritual enlightenment and salvation for
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.
God is near.